not $180. Not a dealer flush. Not a quarterly coolant service appointment booked 6 weeks in advance by a service advisor who earns commission on every line item. $3. That is the exact price of the compound that kept Toyota Corollas and Honda Civics running clean cooling systems past 280,000 kilometers. Original water pumps still spinning. Original hoses still holding pressure. Zero corrosion eating through the radiator. Zero overheating events on the side of a highway at 2 in the afternoon. Not maybe. Not under perfect laboratory conditions with filtered water and climate-controlled storage. Not if you also perform 17 other procedures exactly right and replace your coolant with the premium long-life formula every dealer recommends. Past 280,000 kilometers. Documented, verified, and repeated across decades of real-world Japanese fleet use in taxis, delivery trucks, and long-haul commercial vehicles that never once entered a dealership service bay for a scheduled coolant flush. 99% of car owners will never know this exists. Not because the information is technically difficult to find, because the answer sits inside a $400 billion global automotive aftermarket, and the companies collecting that revenue have spent decades ensuring the cheap solution stayed invisible, stayed off the spec sheet, stayed out of the training manual handed to every service technician who ever slid a drain pan under your car and charged you accordingly. To understand what this compound is, why it works, and why you have never heard about it through any official channel, you have to go back to 1960s Japan. Post-war Japan was rebuilding at a pace the rest of the world was struggling to comprehend. Highways were expanding outward from Tokyo and Osaka. Commercial fleets, taxis running 20 hours a day, freight trucks crossing mountain passes in winter, intercity buses carrying workers between manufacturing centers were multiplying faster than any repair infrastructure could keep pace with. Fleet operators in that era could not afford to pull vehicles off the road every 2 years for coolant flushes. Downtime was lost revenue. Labor was expensive. Parts were expensive. The only thing that wasn't expensive was ingenuity, and the men managing those fleets had plenty of it. Somewhere inside that industrial pressure in the grease-stained workshops of a Japan that ran on pragmatism because it had no choice, an engineer working with high-cycle commercial engines noticed something the global automotive industry would spend the next 60 years trying to make you forget. The base chemistry of antifreeze, ethylene glycol diluted with distilled water, does not actually wear out. Not quickly. Not the way the service interval printed in your owner's manual strongly implies. What degrades is a thin layer of additive chemistry riding on top of it. The pH buffers that keep the solution alkaline, the silicate inhibitors that form a microscopic protective film on every metal surface inside the cooling circuit, and the corrosion-fighting compounds that prevent the glycol from turning into a slow acid bath eating through your engine block from the inside. Strip those additives away through heat cycling and time, and the glycol itself becomes the weapon. It attacks aluminum, it eats iron, it pulls dissolved metal ions into suspension, and turns your coolant the color of rust. That brown, metallic smelling liquid that coats your fingers when you pull the reservoir cap on a neglected engine. The color of a problem that has been building for 18 months while you waited for your next scheduled service. That engineer understood the mechanism, and the solution he identified was almost insultingly simple. A small stabilizing compound, a pH buffer combined with a silicate replenishment agent and a chelating molecule that binds dissolved metal ions already in suspension, added directly to the existing coolant at approximately 30 milliliters per 4 liters of total cooling system capacity. Not a full drain, not a new reservoir of expensive long-life coolant poured in under a dealership invoice. A small bottle, a few yen, added once a year or every 20,000 kilometers, whichever arrived first. The coolant stayed clean. It stayed alkaline, holding pH between 7.5 and 8.5. The precise chemical range where aluminum corrosion stops and iron oxidation slows to nearly nothing. The protective silicate film on the water pump impeller, the radiator tubes, and the aluminum engine block was continuously replenished rather than allowed to degrade to bare metal, and the engines kept running. Fleet maintenance records from Osaka taxi operators working through the late 1960s and into the 1970s showed vehicles accumulating mileage far beyond factory expectations, with cooling systems that appeared nearly new on visual inspection. No scale deposits inside the radiator, no pitting on the water pump, no discoloration in the reservoir. One fleet maintenance log passed between mechanics the way genuinely useful knowledge travels when official channels have decided it isn't profitable, described a cohort of 34 taxis managed by a single senior mechanic who never once authorized a full coolant flush across 11 consecutive years of of daily operation, 0 cooling system failures in that period, 0 water pump replacements traceable to corrosion damage. The dealer never saw a single one of those vehicles for coolant service. The industry knew this was possible, and they built an entire billing cycle around the problem it solved, then quietly removed the solution from every document they controlled. Through the 1970s and into the 1980s, as the Japanese automotive industry expanded aggressively into global markets and dealership networks multiplied across North America, Europe, and Southeast Asia, coolant flush services became one of the most reliable and scalable upsell items in every service department on the planet. Industry trade publications from that period listed coolant system service consistently among the top 5 revenue generators for dealership service bays. A low-skill, high-margin procedure requiring nothing more than a drain pan, a clean funnel, a new jug of premixed coolant, and a customer sitting in a waiting room who trusted the interval printed in the manual sitting in their glove box. That interval, 2 years or roughly 30,000 miles, depending on which market's manual you read, was not derived from engineering failure data showing that coolant became dangerous at the 24-month mark. It was derived from additive depletion rates calibrated to create a service need. The glycol base could run 5, 6, sometimes 7 years without degradation. The additives depleted faster, around the 2-year mark under normal operating conditions. But instead of informing customers that the additives could be replenished cheaply and simply, preserving the existing coolant indefinitely, the service schedule prescribed a full drain, full flush, and full refill. Replace everything, charge accordingly, hand the estimate across the counter like a utility bill. The cheap replenishment compound vanished from official documentation. It was absent from the training curricula distributed to service technicians at manufacturer-sponsored certification programs. It was missing from the spec sheets printed in bulk and distributed through dealership parts departments. It did not appear in the owner's manual, a document written with significant input from the same manufacturers whose aftermarket revenue model depended on the expensive alternative remaining the only option a customer ever heard about. The suppression required no conspiracy in the dramatic sense, no secret meetings, no signed agreements. It operated through something far more effective and far more durable: simple omission. The cheap answer was left off the list, and the expensive answer was laminated to the wall of every service bay in the world, repeated in every service reminder mailer, reinforced by every advisor who learned the interval from the manual and never questioned where the interval came from or who benefited from it. The chemistry behind what those fleet engineers understood is not complicated, and the industry has never disputed it because it cannot. Coolant degradation follows 3 distinct and sequential stages. In the first stage, pH buffers deplete through heat cycling and the acidic byproducts of combustion gases that micro-leak past head gaskets into the cooling system over time, and the solution drifts from alkaline toward neutral and then toward mildly acidic. In the second stage, freed hydrogen ions begin attacking the metal surfaces of the cooling circuit, dissolving trace quantities of iron from the block and cast components, pulling aluminum ions from the head, the water pump housing, and the radiator end tanks into the fluid, producing that brown rust-colored discoloration and that faint metallic smell that signals a cooling system already in active decay. In the third stage, the silicate compounds that form a nanometer-thin protective film on every internal metal surface have fully depleted, leaving bare aluminum and iron exposed directly to the now acidic solution, accelerating corrosion exponentially, depositing scale on radiator tube walls, pitting the water pump impeller, and beginning the slow destruction of the thermostat housing and heater core. A pH buffer compound arrests stage 1 before stages 2 and 3 become possible. A chelating agent introduced in the same bottle binds the dissolved metal ions already present in the fluid and neutralizes their corrosive activity. Silicate replenishment rebuilds the protective film across all metal surfaces and restores the passive barrier that was allowing the cooling system to function correctly in the first place. All 3 mechanisms, 1 small bottle, under $4. Automotive engineering studies examining coolant pH degradation curves confirmed the direct relationship between additive depletion and accelerated corrosion rate decades ago. The technical data has existed in engineering literature since at least the early 1980s. Independent mechanics who tested the additive protocol on aging Japanese vehicles with documented service histories reported pH stability holding between 7.8 and 8.2 across full 12-month intervals between additive applications, compared to untreated coolant in mechanically similar vehicles that dropped to pH readings of 6.1 or below within 18 months of the last flush. Below pH 7, aluminum corrosion rate increases sharply and non-linearly. Every fleet operator who kept this knowledge alive experienced that difference difference as fewer failures, fewer replacements, and fewer invoices. The chemistry explains the mechanism, the fleet records confirm the outcome, and then comes the twist that reframes every service visit you have ever paid for. The premium OEM extended life coolant that dealerships sell as the sophisticated modern evolution of old-fashioned 2-year antifreeze. The product that justifies the higher flush price because now you receive long-life organic acid technology chemistry, which is built on precisely the same principle as the $3 additive compound. Extended life and long-life coolant formulations use organic acid technology known as OAT chemistry, along with carboxylate-based inhibitors that continuously replenish the protective layer on metal surfaces across a longer depletion curve than older silicate-only formulations. The mechanism is identical to the additive protocol. The chemistry addresses the same 3 degradation stages in the same sequence. The difference is packaging and pricing. The long-life coolant pre-blends those stabilizing agents into the glycol base, sells the entire mixture as a complete reservoir replacement requiring a full flush, and delivers the additive chemistry you actually needed at approximately 40 times the per unit cost of buying the replenishment compound separately. You have been paying $180 for the additive chemistry, wrapped inside a full drain and refill procedure involving 10 liters of glycol that did not need to be replaced. The label is different. The underlying solution is the same one a Japanese fleet mechanic was using for a few yen per vehicle in 1971. Japanese commercial fleet operators running large vehicle populations confirmed what the taxi cohorts had demonstrated on a smaller scale. Maintenance logs comparing full flush schedules against the additive-only replenishment protocol across matched vehicle groups showed the additive cohort maintaining cooling system integrity at equivalent or measurably superior levels, while eliminating the flush service cost entirely over the comparison period. The arithmetic is direct. A dealership coolant flush at $180 performed every 2 years across a 10-year vehicle ownership period represents 5 service visits and $900 in total expenditure, excluding the time cost of scheduling, dropping off the vehicle, and collecting it. The additive replenishment protocol at roughly $3 to $4 per application performed annually represents 10 applications and under $40 in total expenditure across the same decade. The delta is $860 per vehicle per ownership cycle. Multiply that across the millions of Toyota and Honda owners sitting in dealership waiting rooms right now, and you begin to understand the scale of what the $400 billion aftermarket is built on. The product you need is an OAT compatible coolant additive, a pH buffer and silicate replenishment agent sold under various brand names at Japanese automotive parts retailers including Super Autobacks and Yellow Hat chains across Japan, and available through online import retailers for buyers outside Japan at the same $2 to $4 price point. The application procedure requires no mechanical tools, no prior automotive experience, and no special equipment beyond the bottle itself. Engine fully cold, cap removed from the coolant reservoir. Approximately 30 milliliters of additive per 4 liters of your system's total coolant capacity poured directly into the reservoir. Most 4-cylinder passenger cars hold between 4 and 8 liters total system volume, meaning one standard bottle treats a single application. Replace the reservoir cap, start the engine, and allow it to reach full operating temperature so the thermostat opens and the additive circulates completely through the entire cooling circuit, including the heater core and radiator. Run it for 15 minutes at idle or a short drive. Shut it down. That procedure, repeated once annually or at every 20,000 kilometer service interval, is the complete protocol. Monitor coolant color at each oil change as a passive pH indicator. Clean coolant in good chemical condition remains clear or retains its original blue-green tint. Coolant that has lost its additive package and begun the corrosion cycle turns progressively browner, cloudier, and eventually develops a faint film on the reservoir walls. If your coolant is already discolored when you begin, perform one full flush first, refill with fresh coolant, and start the additive protocol immediately. If it is still clean, begin now without flushing, and simply maintain the annual addition schedule going forward. That is the complete procedure. Zero specialty tools, zero mechanical skill required, a cold engine, an open cap, a small bottle, and 15 minutes. The industry spent 4 decades making sure you associated coolant maintenance with a $180 service visit rather than a $4 bottle and a Saturday morning. A suppressed additive patent filed in the early 1980s and a series of trade publication studies from the same era confirmed that the replenishment chemistry was understood, was documented, and was available, and then was systematically absent from every service manual, every dealership training curriculum, and every official maintenance schedule published in the years that followed. Fleet maintenance logs preserved the truth in grease-stained binders, while dealership service bays charged for the fiction printed in the manual those same manufacturers wrote. Mechanics who learned the protocol from Japanese fleet operators passed it sideways through the industry, workshop to workshop, never through official channels, because official channels belonged to the revenue model that required you to remain uninformed. The pH chemistry is not in dispute. The three-stage corrosion mechanism is not in dispute. The cost comparison is arithmetic. What was suppressed, deliberately and systematically through omission, was the connection between them. The plain fact that a $3 bottle replenishing 3 depleting additive compounds eliminates the entire justification for the 2-year flush cycle that the industry built its aftermarket revenue on. Every fleet log, every pH curve, every engineering study, every taxi that rolled past 300,000 kilometers on its original water pump and original radiator, while the dealer waited for a service appointment that never came. All of it points to the same conclusion. The $400 billion aftermarket needed you to believe coolant simply wears out. It doesn't. The additives deplete, and the additives cost $3 to replace, not $180, not a dealer, not every 2 years, $3, 1 bottle, 5 years. That is the secret they spent 4 decades making sure you never found.